that is right. You are listening to the home of conservative, not bitter talk. Yes, we're going to talk vice presidential debate tonight. Vice presidential debate. Or this morning, last night's vice presidential debate. And there's lots to talk about, yes, including the Pence fly, which appears to be the biggest news on Twitter this morning. But it's good to be here. Thank you for joining us. Email todd@toddhuffshow.com. You know, I found out yesterday that we're now streaming the program live to our website, which you can see by visiting toddhuffshow.com. You can also watch it on Facebook and YouTube and Periscope/Twitter. So it is good to be here, and I appreciate you joining us. So let's talk about this vice presidential debate last night. Just opening, I guess, impressions from the debate. I think the impressions that I got were that, of course, first and foremost, this thing was much different than the debate we saw last week between President Trump and former Vice President Joe Biden. This thing, for people who are, I don't know, those that have followed politics closely their entire lives or for a long time, this is something that felt more like a debate. It seemed more serious. It got tense at times. By the way, I just, the likability of Kamala Harris is just, I don't see it. I don't see how this was a good pick by Joe Biden to select Kamala Harris. I don't know how she's, received by average suburban women, for example, or just the condescending tone, the facial expressions. I don't see that at all. I think she's a very unlikable politician. Just her stage presence, if you will, her facial expressions, her "don't lecture to me" stuff, just is not. Again, we're in the world now of, televised debates, and this is just, I think, an unfortunate part of what, I guess the Kennedy debates were the first televised, and people talked about how good-looking Kennedy was and all this sort of stuff, and that we went from talking about issues to talking about the theater of this stuff. And I think along with that comes some of this. I mean, you can't simply talk about ideas anymore. There's all these other factors, and I'm not saying that none of them. I don't mean to be misunderstood and think that none of them matter. Some of these things do matter. I think you can tell some things about temperament and attitude, and I think those things can certainly play a role in someone's decision. Now, if we're using the video to see who has the better smile or who has the clothing that the audience prefers or who wore the right color, red or blue or whatever sort of stuff, that's a total different conversation. But I think you can tell a lot about the personalities of those on the stage. And, of course, Pence came out and did what Pence does. Pence is going to stay calm. He's going to stay focused. He was on the attack on Kamala Harris, on her ideology, on the administration's, well, not the administration's, on the Harris-Biden. I think we should start calling it that, the Harris-Biden ticket. I mean, they did. Both of them have done this. Both Kamala Harris and Joe Biden have referred to this as the Harris-Biden administration, future Harris-Biden administration, at least the Harris-Biden campaign today. I think we should refer to it as such because of things we talked about yesterday. And, of course, it goads the radical left just a little bit. But there's a lot of radical ideas. She was, as Pence pointed out, Kamala Harris in 2017, believe it was 2017, she was voted or named the most liberal senator in the U.S. Senate, which is a big, big statement. I think Newsweek did that. That's a big, big statement. Folks, she is on the ballot with Joe Biden. And being on the ballot with Joe Biden, as we pointed out yesterday, and as it came up last night in the debate as well, but being on the ballot with Joe Biden, Biden would be the oldest president ever elected. Biden is showing signs on the debate trail as he's hidden in his basement, as he's answering questions. In some cases, people think using teleprompters to do interviews. As he's doing these things and making more than just gaffes, making literally no sense. Of course, Biden's always made gaffes, so that's not new. But the degree to which these gaffes even make, they make less sense as we go further into Biden's long political career, spanning nearly half a century. Again, it's amazing, and I think this is a totally fair point. The leftists don't like it, but suddenly a guy that's been in D.C., been in the in crowd, basically, one of the most powerful political men in America for a long, long time, close to half a century, at least 40 years in that category. If you're a senator of the United States, folks, you're one of 100 people in that body. In that body that has a lot of power, acting as though you've only served during times when America was fundamentally flawed, shows that you as a candidate must be fundamentally flawed. And Pence hit on that a little bit last night as well, as he should have. But Pence was on point. Pence was not, it's in many ways the polar opposite of what we saw last week between Biden and Trump. And I know, again, some people prefer this. This one was more issues focused, but it was much less entertaining, which of course is not the only reason to watch. But look, to keep people's attention, there is something to be said about the entertainment factor of politicians. So anyway, I think it was clear that this was a much, much different feeling debate. This is something that many of the establishment types, people who, I have a friend that worries constantly about whether or not some suburban woman in some American city is going to be upset by Trump over something. And seeing this performance by Pence last night, my friend feels much, much better. I don't know, at the end of the day, how much difference does this make? How many Americans are truly undecided voters? How can you be undecided? Folks, we have two diametrically opposed worldviews on the ballot. And Pence exposed that last night. Whether it's talking about the Green New Deal, which the Harris-Biden plan for the Green New Deal, their version of the Green New Deal is slightly different, just slightly different. It's modified. It's the Green New Deal, except it's got a different name. That's what this is. And then they act as though they have that their plan has nothing to, no similarity whatsoever to the Green New Deal. They talked about taxes. Kamala Harris said that if there was a President Biden in the Harris-Biden administration, then he would eliminate the Trump tax cuts day one. The Trump tax cuts, of course, have helped. This is another thing that should be a no-brainer. The Trump tax cuts have helped the vast majority of American families. Statistically, people in every group have benefited. Every income group have benefited from the tax cuts. That plus the increased wages that have come. Now, of course, now we're dealing with a post-COVID world, so that's we're recovering from those effects. But if you look at where the economy was prior to COVID, If you look at where it was prior to COVID, we had a roaring, strong economy, incredibly low as unemployment rates can go, sort of numbers, stock market success, business optimism, consumer confidence, all of these things moving forward. And they want to have a debate over the economy. I say let's have that debate. I think the average American is not prepared to become a socialist. I think the average American understands, when it's properly explained to them, what's on the ballot. But see, the Democrats want this to be a race a race about race is what they want this to be, or a race about gender. Kamala Harris would be the first black female vice president. That is apparently all it takes. That's all it took for her to be on Joe Biden's short list, if you let that sink in. I was listening to her last night talk about the reasons Joe Biden chose her, and I don't mean this disrespectfully, but the truth is, she was on Joe Biden's short list, and Joe Biden has admitted this, because these are the only qualifications he gave prior to his selection of Kamala Harris for vice president. He said, I'm looking for, it's going to be a black woman. I think he said it's going to be a woman, and then at some point further down that path, he said it would be a black woman. That's the discussion of qualifications. Again, no problems with it being a black woman or any, whichever male, female, whichever race, all that stuff is not relevant to me. What's relevant is ideas. And see, last night we saw ideas on display. We saw a leftist who, if you look strictly at the logic of this, was decimated by the conservative on the stage. Now, some people are going to love the Kamala Harris faces. Some people are going to talk about the fly that landed on Mike Pence's hair. I had friends texting me about what's going on with Pence's left eye. See, I take notes during this thing. I didn't really notice much with the eye. For those of you that watched intently, I keep in mind my eyes are on I used my iPad last night to take the notes. I was jotting down things literally for an hour and a half. I did see the fly. When I glanced up, the fly was pretty obvious at certain angles. So that was a big thing on Twitter. So we have to factor that in. What do people, some people, there's someone in America today that saw a fly land on Pence, and suddenly they can't vote for Pence because that's some sort of omen or something. Guarantee it, there's someone in America that thinks about that literally will base a decision on that. Those are the voters that make these elections difficult to predict, because anything can happen between now and the time they cast their ballots. Someone might see that Pence has a great jump shot, or that, who knows, Kamala Harris likes to surf, or who knows, whatever it is, and that's why campaigns do these silly, stupid things. That's why we had in 2016 sexy Martin O'Malley. You probably don't even remember Martin O'Malley unless you followed the election closely. Martin O'Malley was basically, the Democrats didn't even know about Martin O'Malley. He was one of 5 Democrats on that stage back in 2016. Remember that very diverse stage the Democrats gave us with 5 old white guys and a Clinton? Sexy Martin O'Malley was completely irrelevant. It was between Hillary and the nutty Professor Bernie Sanders back then. And there were a couple of other guys that no one knew anything about. And the only way that sexy Martin O'Malley had any relevance was he showed up at a Maryland beach one day without his shirt on, and Twitter went bonkers over it. They liked this guy shirtless, I guess. Hence the name sexy Martin O'Malley. So, but this is, there's that component, but then there's also the studious types that think, oh, wow, Trump, Pence made a great point here. Kamala Harris doesn't know what she's talking about there. She was exposed in many ways. I think she revealed the type of, her facial expressions and kind of attitude revealed a lot. I don't know how that's appealing to the average person. I'm sure to some they thought She was sticking it to the Trump administration, and she was standing up there with Joseph Goebbels in her mind. So of course she should be have a little bit of an attitude. So there's that wing of the discussion as well. But I think overall this was Pence pretty much dominated this thing last night. Pence dominated this debate. Kamala Harris, to me, had no good moments. And again, she didn't do anything over the top that was, going to, I think, harm her in great ways, although she was incredibly unlikable. But I maintain if you watched any of the Democrat debates back earlier this year, I think you would find that she wasn't likable then as well. She's just not a largely likable candidate. She kind of comes across a little bit hateful and condescending, if you ask me, maybe a lot. So I just don't know I don't think that she helped Biden last night. But again, how many people watch these things really uncertain about who they're voting for? And if they are quote unquote uncertain, are they 95% certain and they're just looking to see if there's any reason they would switch their minds? This is what I don't know. There's not in my estimation, a large swath of undecided voters. Could be wrong. Again, people make decisions based upon things sometimes that make literally no sense. Sometimes people have perceptions that I'm not aware of that do make sense. There's just a variety of possibilities here, but I just think just the overall feeling of that last night was that Pence stayed on point. Pence exposed her radical ideas a little bit. I don't know how many people pick up on that. I don't know how many people care about that, who've been undecided here. But Pence pretty much annihilated her in the debate. But at the same time, she didn't do anything that dramatically, unquestionably is going to hurt the Biden campaign. Now, you can point to things and say it should, and I would agree, but she didn't have any major slip-ups and gaffes or super embarrassing moments. She lost pretty much the argument on all these issues because, again, you're up against conservatism. If you're a radical leftist, it's I don't know how you win those arguments. You really can't. Anyway, more to say about this. Got to take a time out here. A little bit long in the segment. You're listening to the Home of Conservative, Not Bitter Talk. I'm your host, Todd Huff. Back in just a minute.
Listen to Todd's show on your way to work, but want to hear more? Don't miss a beat. Visit ToddHuffShow.com/listen